Of course, the usual shilling, like, comment, subscribe, share, rate, whatever you want. Today we'll be tackling a pretty interesting event, I would say. And it's one of my favorite events from a little game known as League of Legends. Yeah, we're going there. Unfortunately, League of Legends isn't as cool as the lore might say it is, though the lore is sometimes cool, sometimes not, but that's a different story. We'll be looking at the invasion of Ionia. Probably the only event in League of Legends history that ended with a match between both sides, a real League of Legends match that saw the end of the event be determined by the winner of the match. That's pretty cool, and from my knowledge, they haven't done that since then. But if they would be to do this now, they would probably do a Twitter poll created by somebody that has a lot of colors in their name. Nevertheless, let's begin our introduction. The invasion of Ionia happened between the year 945 and 989. Now, the invasion of Ionia wasn't just a singular event. It wasn't the only thing happening at that time, because Noxus back then, it was fighting on each and every side it could, and every front possible, doing an Austrian painter, if you will. But without further ado, let's begin proper into the lore. The Noxian invasion of Ionia was ordered by the Noxian ruler, King Boram Darkwill, in the later years of his life. He was very old, as you can imagine. The objective of the invasion appeared to be material, Boram ordering the army to scour for magical items, particularly those that could extend life. But remember what I told you in the beginning. This wasn't just a problem with Ionia, he was looking for those items everywhere. But we'll focus on this part. One of the first locations to be attacked in the Noxian invasion would be Phalor, the place where Syndra was imprisoned. Desperate from their inability to defend themselves, the Ionians living there awakened Syndra, hoping her power would help them in their battle and make them bring victory to their village and their people and their country. But as you can imagine, however, Syndra would attack friend and foe alike, unwilling to assist her detainers in battle. It was a free-for-all when it came to Syndra. Noxian Admiral Drak and his soldiers led conquests into the Navari region, occupying different villages, including the village where the San family lived. That name might not tell you much, but it will soon enough. Because you see, the entire San family was killed by the Noxian invaders. But in a sort of twist of fate, like in Anastasia, one heiress survived. And that was Irelia, a student of the traditional blade silk dances of the province, whose biggest desire was to dance, but now had a bigger role to play in the invasion. The grief of losing her family awokened her inherent abilities, and she would join the resistance fighters that were slowly gathering to preserve their nation. Of course, during the Noxian invasion, some people fled in the wake of the incoming armies, or some of them even switched sides. The Ionian monastery in Galrin struck a deal with the Demacian traders and had the orphan children they had in their care sent to Demacia. Among those children was Sona. Nice, right? You didn't know that about Sona. Some of the Vastaya tribes allied with Noxus and supported them in their conquest, which will become important and interesting in somebody else's story. But we'll see. During the invasion, Ionia suffered some defeats, and the Noxian War really greatly impacted the region for years to come. It was devastating for the land, even causing the incarnation of the spirit of Ionia, Karma, to question and even defy her previous non-reactionary teachings. Ionia was ready to fight back. Though Karma met opposition in her own order, it was the will of the land to preserve itself against the invaders. In Hirana, Lysin, alongside the Frelordian spirit walker Udir, came to protect the holy Shosian monastery from the Noxian sieging it. Lysin would be able to channel the power of the dragon and bring the monks to victory. But the battle was a terrible one, destroying the monastery and leaving the monk without his eyesight. But some prices are worth paying sometimes to survive, or to bring vengeance upon your enemies. During the battle at the Temple of Pallas, 2 beast hunters who had confronted and even drove off the Noxian army retreated into the temple in search of healing for their grave wounds. There were only 2 against an army. All they found inside was nothing but the corrupting power of the darkened virus. And thanks to that power, the 2 were forged into one being. And Varus found himself a new body and made it from their flesh. Here he was, reborn into the world. Now, one creature you might not expect to have participated even a little during the Noxian invasion is Bard. But Bard manifested on Runeterra because of an interesting event. It was a Noxian invasion, of course, and some villagers wanted to use an egg that would bring devastation to the Noxian invaders. And you can see the whole egg thing was pretty dangerous, and using it would be an abuse. So Bard came to stop them and prevent the abuse of a magical item by the Ionian citizens. Another pivotal part of the Ionian War was Zed's decision to reject the path of balance and leave the King Ko, who refused to fight against the Noxian invasion. Zed was once one of the most prolific pupils, of the temple, alongside the temple master's son, Shen. Sometimes inaction in front of great injustice creates even worse enemies. But not always. Because of this, Zed would create his own order, the Order of Shadow, who would fight the Noxian invaders and punish those who stood against Ionia. Remember those Vastayan? Well, the punishment of the Order of Shadow also included those who would not fight for the nation or openly opposed it, such as the traitorous Vastayan tribes. Once he had found enough followers, Zed would apparently attack the Kinkoku temple to obtain the black box which held the power of darkness. He would kill his master, Master Kusho, and he would then leave. The remaining Kinkoku students were led by Kusho's son, Shed, who fled and would rebuild the temple order elsewhere, appointing Shen as the new Eye of Twilight, their new leader. But there's an interesting aspect to the Ionian War, because once it started, Noxus wasn't that prepared. Remember, Noxus decided to start a war on all fronts, and their men and supplies were limited. They weren't prepared for a full-scale war on all sides. Also important, they were fighting the Freljord during this time. I hate that word. Despite getting some victories, the Noxian army was not working at full capacity. At the time, Noxus was fighting, as I said, wars on multiple fronts, and their manpower was not only limited, as I said before, but was also depleting. The war in Ionia was being led by several war bands. One important character to note is Draven, who was initially in the warband of his own brother Darius, but matters had it that he didn't like the way his brother led, so he decided to hop around warbands, switching places here and there, before he would later on go back to Noxus and join the Reckoning Pits. Another important character in these warbands is the general of the Noxian army, or one of them, Jericho Swain, who was the main leader of charges when it came to the invasion. The Noxian Empire suffered their first defeat during the Battle of Placidium, one of the most sacred places in Ionia. Swain had succeeded in capturing the Placidium and holding its militia hostage to lure in the Ionian reinforcements into a trap. But the plan would fail. The reinforcements, led by none other than Irelia, came in and defeated Swain's veteran troops, and Irelia herself would strike down Swain, cutting off his arm and damaging his knee, turning him into a cripple. Irelia would then go on to lead the resistance force in battle for the remaining 3 years of the war, until the victory at Dalu Bay, where she would also claim the life of Admiral Ducal. The battle at Placidium left General Swain's armies scattered and himself on the brink of death. Swain was cast out of the military after his defeat, despite dissenting voices of others, which Darius was included in them. However, the battle and the near-death experiences also gave him a glimpse of insight into the power he now wields. He would learn and meet the raven creature known as Raum, and that's a different story. But once that was done, and after he helped Draven recover from a bad case of big failure, he created a coup and he was able to discover that Boram Darkwill, tempted by promises of eternal life, was now being controlled by the Black Rose Society, led by LeBlanc, who once tried to overthrow the king, but then matters turned out a bit awry and they were discovered by Jericho Swain. Of course, Jericho Swain had everyone butchered there, including his own parents, but LeBlanc would escape and gave the impression to the whole of Noxus that the Black Rose was gone forever. Swain stepped into the Immortal Bastion, and there he learned to wield the power of the demon realm that lay within him. He would prepare his coup for many years, garnering, as I said, the support of a failure Draven while he was at his lowest, and in one night, they would take control of Noxus, killing Boram Darkwill and ending the Noxian War on Ionia. But before we can go to the end, there are still a few things we must touch upon. In the years Swain prepared his coup, Noxus' strategies would become more and more desperate, employing attrition tactics and looking to chemical weapons developed by the man in Zon known as Singed to turn the war in their favor. This new weapon, chemical weapon, was escorted by Riven and warband leader Emistan. They would scorch the earth of the Wuju village, the town where Master Yi had learned the Wuju swordsmanship style, in an attempt to avoid other warriors as strong as him to come to Ionia's defenses. Riven was expected to die in the chemical attack, another pawn in sacrifice for the Noxian war machine, alongside the Ionians and the other unaware Noxians that guided the weapon. But she would survive, and the betrayal would make her reject Noxus and shatter her runic blade in defiance. Moving on, the Order of Shadow and the Kinku struck a deal to put aside their differences as they focused on combating the Noxian threat. This was after, Shen kind of rebuilt everything. Shen then took in an apprentice, Akali, who was once Zed's, who showed great potential, although at times also struggled to maintain the path of balance and patience, like Zed had. Zed would also take a disciple, the young Noxian, Cain, who was sent into Bahru at the mouth of the Ipul River as a child soldier. Zed found Cain left behind after the carnage of the village, took him under his wing, and made him his apprentice. Going back to Swain, once he took over the empire, Swain pulled back the Noxian forces from the many campaigns scattered in the world, from Shurima to Freljord to Ionia. The war had divided Ionia into isolationist groups advocating for peace and those supporting unified militarization, which is bound to happen when you conquer a nation. This story now has two different perspectives, shall we call them. First, it is implied that Swain called back every warrior out there and every general, including Darius. But another perspective is that Darius himself came to ask for military reforms and making their military stronger. Nevertheless, whichever it is, Darius came home and he returned to the capital after the years-long attrition war in the Freljord against the Winter's Claw, and he wanted to confront the Emperor and request military reform. But there he found Swain and his brother. As Hand of Noxus, some expected Darius to battle Swain and avenge the Emperor who gave him the title. However, it's important to note that Darius' loyalties laid with Noxus, and he judged the coup and those responsible for it to have been justified, and basically offering them legal protection. The vision that Darius had for the Empire was the one that he shared with those that attempted the coup, and that was a vision worth following to him. Do not think that Darius stood his hand just because his brother was there. He would have easily killed Draven, no problem. With Darius' support, Swain met with the leaders of the Noxian houses. He either obtained their support or banished the opposition and reformed Noxus into a nation led by cooperation and unity rather than tyranny. He also did something interesting. He created a triumvirate by instating the Trifarix, a three rulers leadership system that would prevent future cases of corruption of the Noxian leaders thanks to the Black Rose. And it followed like this. He instated Darius to rule alongside him, because Darius was the strength of Noxus and he represented the ferocity of battle and the strength of warriors. There was Swain, who represented the mind of the Noxian people, desire and ambition. And the last seat of the Trifarix is held by an undisclosed person, embodying the guile of Noxus. During his conquest of Noxus, Swain also imposed meritocracy in leadership and military positions, taxes on wealth, which screw you, Swain, as well as outlawed the ownership of people in the Empire. Darius would then go on to create the Trifarian Legion of elite warriors, and as you can imagine, with the death of Boram Darkwill and the general's home, Ionia was saved. There was no more invasion. All Noxian troops came home. But that didn't mean the people of the world of Runeterra didn't look at Noxus with fear and skepticism, because they all remember the wars that they had to fight against them, how terrible they were, and how poisonous were Zaun's weapons against them. And because of that, they were uneasy. And as recently as 3 years ago or something like that, there are rumors that Noxus is invading Ionia once more. We can see images of Scion fighting Ionian warriors. And now the question is, how much more will we know of this battle to come? Very little. In the old lore, the whole ending was established by a match fought between Noxus and Ionia, which I really liked more, and the Ionian side won, so Noxus had to retreat its armies. And I liked it because the old lore kind of gave a sense of power to the summoners. It made them feel like this supranational entity that could resolve its problems in a more peaceful way than shedding the lifeblood of millions. Let's get back to our main story though. While the war was over, technically, there were some that still held the spirit of Noxus and still tried to fight Ionia. And against them stood Zed and the Shadow Council, always ready to fight and always ready to do the most horrible things to consolidate power and enact vengeance upon the Noxians that still remain. Not only the Noxians, the rest of the Vastayan tribes as well, because sins of the father, I guess, or sins of the cousin in this case. But the aftermath of the invasion of Ionia didn't end all that peacefully. You see, Irelia led the resistance against Noxus, but after the war she gave up on her position. And other forces, like Zed, I've mentioned earlier, tried to come in and make their way known and get control of the whole country. Another such faction, shall we say, is the Navori Brotherhood, who is an extremist group looking to militarize Ionia to fight the invaders, or those still left. As you can probably imagine, this group was formed during the leadership of Irelia, but at some point they were unsatisfied with her rule, shall I say, and they wanted a leader that was more aggressive, somebody that could bring the fight back to Noxus. During the invasion, they liked to partake in the well-respected and well-known tradition of child soldiers. They would go to villages, kidnapping the young and the able and using them in the war. They, of course, are very aggressive towards Irelia, and many elements of the Brotherhood consider Irelia a threat to their goals of militarizing the country. Jon gets killed by Yasuo at some point during the war, that's not important. And the other part of the world that gets looked upon during the invasion of Ionia is in Freljord, and it's basically Ashe getting her tribe, naming it the Avarosa whatever, and Sejuani becoming the leader of hers after she murders her mother in battle, after which she gathers some tribes into her Winter's Claw. Now with a huge host at her side, she can be a challenge to Darius and his own war host. So much so that Darius' whole campaign turns into a war of attrition, a never-ending war that sees more casualties than any victory. That's bad for the Noxians, because the Noxians have less people. Because of that, the people of Freljord would even try to assassinate and capture Darius, but he would manage to avoid both of those, which, thankfully, that's good. And the rest of the story I've already told you. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next one.